I'm delighted to be joined today by Alexander Downer, who is Australia's Minister for Foreign Affairs for a record-breaking 11 and a half years. Since 2014, he has been the Australian High Commissioner here in London. It's been said that the UK might join the TransPacific Partnership. That partnership, of course, has not come into force yet. I'm interested in your views as to when it might come into force and the advantages and disadvantages for the UK of joining, if indeed you think it's feasible.
Well, first of all, although the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is of 11 countries, is, as its name suggests, a Pacific agreement, it is an open agreement. So the signatories to it, and they signed the agreement on the 8th of March, the signatories to it are open to other countries joining as long as they meet the terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There is still the ratification process ahead. Of the 11 countries, 6 have to ratify it for the Trans-Pacific Partnership to come into force. So I suspect that wouldn't take too long to get 6 of them to ratify it. What are the advantages? Well, this is an example of a plurilateral trade agreement, which for, say, Australia, opens up markets in countries like Mexico and Canada and Vietnam, as well as Japan, with which we already have a bilateral free trade agreement, in Singapore and New Zealand. Likewise with them, we already have bilateral free trade agreements. But for us, it opens up goods and services markets in a number of countries with which we didn't have that arrangement. I think, again, these kind of agreements are psychologically important. I mean, just as the European Union has been in trade terms, it creates a sense of political teamwork between countries that are party to a plurilateral agreement like that. And in the Asia-Pacific region, that's not a bad thing. We're sorry the United States has backed out of it, and we hope that President Trump will think again and maybe become part of it sometime in the not-too-distant future.
And do you see any disadvantages for the UK in joining it?
No, there would be no disadvantages. There may be some adjustments to some of your domestic policies, of course, if you join these kinds of trade agreements. But I wouldn't say I thought so. I mean, look, this depends on what your worldview is, but our worldview in the Australian government is the more open you are to the international marketplace for goods, for services, for investment, the more you can get mutual recognition of qualifications and the like, the more prosperous you're going to become. And the other side to that is if you decide to go down the closed economy path, well, you'll end up like Venezuela. It's a closed economy and everyone's suffering in that country as a result. One of the reasons they're suffering as a result. So this would be part of opening up global Britain. I mean, you know, countries like Australia and Vietnam and Japan and Mexico, Canada, these are all really important economies. Other than Vietnam in that list, they're G20 countries. So it would give the UK much greater economic involvement with those countries than it currently has. So that would have to be a good thing.
Well, perhaps the biggest prize for global Britain, or some of the biggest prizes, would be entering into free trade agreements with China and India, the 2 biggest countries by population. Having some experience of both countries from the trade point of view, what do you think this country's prospects of reaching an agreement with either are?
Well, first of all, the biggest prize for you would be outside of the EU, other than having a free trade agreement with the EU. That would be the biggest prize. But the next biggest prize would be a free trade agreement with the United States. I think the next biggest prize after that would be a free trade agreement with China. We have one. 94% of all our exports to China go into China duty-free. And since we've had the free trade agreement with China, which is only a couple of years, we've seen huge growth in some of our exports as tariffs have gradually been reduced. So what are the prospects of negotiating a free trade agreement with China? Well, Theresa May and her predecessor David Cameron said this was a golden era in Anglo-Chinese relations. So if that's the case, I think it wouldn't be too difficult for you to do at all. I mean, there would be sort of reasonably complex issues to deal with on the way through, but I don't think it would be too difficult for you to negotiate a trade agreement with China. India, though, might be more difficult. We have in principle agreed to negotiate a free trade agreement with India, but it's proving quite hard going at this stage. So India has not got a long history of engagement in free trade, so there's still a lot of protectionist sentiment in different parts of the Indian economy, so I think it could be a little way off.
Alexander, thank you for sparing the time to join us today, and thank you for your insights on what is a matter of vital national interest for the UK.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure.